She divorced him because he was, quote, just a mechanic. Now she's calling him to fix her sink. She has no idea he owns the building she lives in, and she definitely has no idea about her new boyfriend's paycheck. This is Daniel Cole's story, and she walked right into it. The morning Renee slid the divorce papers across the kitchen table, she was already dressed for brunch. Not the thrown-together kind, the planned kind. The kind where you tell your friends in advance so they can arrange their faces into the right expression when you walk in and say, "I finally did it." She had her keys in her hand before Daniel even reached for the envelope. 7 words. That's all she gave him. "I deserve better, Daniel." No argument, no raised voice, just the sound of heels on hardwood. And then the door, closing behind her with the quiet, deliberate click of a woman who had already grieved something and moved on. Daniel sat at that table for a long time. The coffee went cold. He didn't fix it. He just looked at the papers. Then out the window at his beat-up 2009 Silverado sitting in the driveway. Dented rear panel, cracked mirror he'd been meaning to replace for 2 years. And he thought about a question he'd asked himself the day he married her. Does she love me, or does she love what I could become? He had his answer now. Let's go back 4 years, because that's where this story actually starts. Daniel wasn't a mechanic who got lucky. He was an engineer who got tired. Tired of pitch decks, tired of investor calls, tired of flying to San Francisco to sit in rooms with men who used the word disruptive without irony. For 11 years, he had built a logistics software company out of a rented garage in Tulsa, the kind of company that quietly makes supply chains run smoother without anyone knowing its name. The kind of company that a private equity group pays $380 million for on a Tuesday afternoon while you're eating a sandwich. He told his lawyer, he told his accountant, he told no one else, not his brother, not his college roommate, not Renee, because Daniel needed to know something first, something that couldn't be answered in a boardroom or a bank statement. He and Renee had been married 3 years at the sale. 3 years of her telling dinner party guests he ran an auto shop. That slight pause before auto shop doing more damage than she probably realized. 3 years of watching her lean in when other men talked about portfolios and properties, and lean slightly back when Daniel talked about a transmission job that had taken 4 days. He wasn't bitter. He was scientific about it. I need a controlled environment, he thought. I need to know what she married. So he kept the truck. Kept Cole's Auto, a legitimate shop he'd owned for years, staffed by 3 guys he'd worked alongside for a long time. He kept his hands dirty, and slowly, carefully, he let things look worse than they were. It started small. A comment about a slow month at the shop, a conversation about restructuring costs. He stopped suggesting weekend trips. He started clipping coupons, not because he needed to, because he needed to see. Renee noticed. Of course she did. Renee noticed everything that reflected on her. The first shift came at a dinner with her co-workers. Her colleague Brandon had just closed a deal on a mixed-use development. The table was buzzing. Daniel was quiet, as he usually was in those rooms. Later, in the car, Renee said, "You could have said something." About what? About, I don't know. Anything. You just sat there. I was listening. She looked out the window. It's embarrassing, Daniel. He didn't respond. He filed it. Over the next several months, the distance between them grew, in the precise, measurable way that distance grows when one person stops pretending. Renee started framing him in conversation as, my husband, he does auto work. He heard it once at a party. He recognized the tone immediately. It was the tone of a woman preparing an exit narrative. He wasn't wrong. 8 months after the sale, 8 months of engineered decline, Renee told him she'd been thinking. I've been patient, she said. I supported this, but I'm 35, Daniel. I have goals. I have a life I'm trying to build, and I feel like I'm dragging you into it. You're not dragging me anywhere. That's the problem. You're not moving. He asked her once, directly, clearly, if the shop turned around, if things got better financially, would that change this? She hesitated, just long enough. It's not about money, she said. They both knew that was the least true sentence spoken in that kitchen in years. The divorce was clean, no drama, no punishment. He let her go. She found an apartment within the month, a duplex in a quiet part of Midtown Tulsa, nice street, good light, reasonable rent. She found it through a property management company called Cornerstone Residential LLC. Professional website, clean branding, an owner whose name appeared nowhere in the public-facing paperwork. That owner was Daniel. He hadn't planned it that way. He'd acquired 12 residential properties over the past 3 years through a holding structure his accountant had set up after the sale. Cornerstone managed 8 of them. Renee's duplex, Unit A on Drexel Avenue, was one of his. He found out when his attorney texted him, "Your ex-wife just signed a lease on one of yours. Thought you should know." He sat with that information for 2 days. Then he made a decision. He called the maintenance contractor who handled Drexel Avenue and told him he'd be taking that property over personally for a while. He ordered a uniform, navy blue, work boots he already owned, a name patch that read, Dale. He trimmed his beard fuller, picked up a pair of plain lens glasses from a drugstore rack, and drove to Drexel Avenue on a Tuesday morning to fix a gutter. Renee's car wasn't in the driveway. He worked for 2 hours, wrote up the service note, and left before she got home. The first time she saw him, she didn't see him at all. It was a Saturday. She called the management office about a bathroom exhaust fan that rattled. Daniel showed up at 10 a.m. with a tool bag and a work order. She answered the door in a robe, phone pressed to her ear, mid-conversation, and waved him in without looking at his face. He replaced the fan motor in 22 minutes. She was still on the phone when he finished. "All done," he said. "Mm-hmm," she said, glancing over. "Thank you." He nodded and left. That was the entire exchange. 2 years of marriage, 8 years together. She looked through him like he was furniture. He drove home, sat in his truck for a moment, and felt something he hadn't expected. Not anger, clarity. The calls came regularly after that. The kitchen faucet, a sticky sliding door, a circuit breaker tripping in the back bedroom. Each time, Daniel showed up in the Navy uniform, tools in hand, name patch on chest. Each time, Renee was polite, the way people are polite to service workers when they want to seem like good people, pleasantly transactional. She never looked at his face long enough for recognition to find a foothold. Once, after he'd spent 40 minutes lying on her kitchen floor fixing a leaky pipe under the sink, she left a $5 bill on the counter. "Thanks, sweetie," she said, without looking up from her laptop. Daniel pocketed the $5. He would keep it, not out of cruelty, out of the same instinct that made him keep the divorce papers in a drawer instead of shredding them. Because some things are important to remember accurately. That was also the month Marcus appeared. Daniel heard him first. A voice from the back bedroom, deep, confident, talking about a Q3 rollout, in the tone of a man who had recently been promoted 1 level above his actual competence. A week later, Renee mentioned to the leasing office she'd be adding an occasional overnight guest and wanted to confirm the guest parking policy. The leasing agent forwarded the note to Daniel out of routine. He pulled the name from the context. Marcus Webb. He ran it through the HR portal of the logistics company he still quietly controlled, the firm that had spun out of the original acquisition. Most employees had no idea the company still traced back to a mechanic in Tulsa. Marcus Webb, mid-level operations coordinator, 14 months in. Decent reviews, with 1 flag, a supervisor's note from 8 months back. Irregular hour reporting, monitor closely. Daniel read the flag twice. Then he forwarded it to the internal audit team with one line: "Please escalate and brief me before the Q3 mixer." He closed his laptop. Outside, the 2009 Silverado sat in the driveway. Dented panel, cracked mirror. He still hadn't fixed it. The mixer was Renee's idea of a comeback. That's the thing nobody tells you about people who leave. They don't just leave. They relaunch. They find someone new. They build a whole second act around proving the first one was someone else's fault. Marcus was Renee's second act. The BMW he leased, a 5 Series in mineral white, parked slightly crooked every time, like a man still getting used to a life that didn't quite fit, was the prop. The company mixer was the stage. She mentioned it to Dale on a Wednesday while he was replacing a bathroom light fixture. "The party's Friday. I need the place to not smell like that pipe situation. I'll check the P-trap before I leave. Please." Marcus's whole team is going to be there. His boss is flying in. Big deal. She said it the way people announce things they're hoping will impress by proximity. "My boyfriend's important, boss." As a loan against her own status. Daniel stepped down from the step stool and made a note on his clipboard. "I'll have someone do a full walkthrough Thursday morning. Make sure everything's clean." "That'd be great." She glanced over. Surface level. Face, but not features. "You're good at this, Dale." "Thank you," he said. He checked the P-trap, wrote up the service note, and drove to his actual office, 12 floors up, downtown, corner suite, view of the Arkansas River, where his assistant had already printed the audit team's briefing. He read it over lunch. Marcus Webb had been padding his hours for the better part of a year. Not dramatically, the careful kind. 15 minutes here, a half day coded wrong there. Expense reports that didn't survive close inspection. The total, over 14 months, came to a number that was almost insultingly small, given the risk he'd taken. Daniel set the paper down. He thought about a $5 bill on a kitchen counter. Some people, he thought, just show you exactly who they are, if you give them enough time. He called his HR director. "Friday. Handle it at the mixer. I want to be in the room." Friday arrived the way important nights always do, ordinary until they aren't. Daniel dressed carefully, not flashily, a charcoal suit, well cut, no tie, the kind of outfit that reads as effortless because enormous care went into it. Beard trimmed back to how Renee used to know it, clean, close. The face she'd looked at across a kitchen table for 8 years. The glasses were gone. The name patch was in a drawer at home. He arrived at the clubhouse of the Cornerstone complex. His complex, 12 units on Meridian, at 7:15. His property manager, Claudette, had handled the setup. Catered appetizers, open bar, low lighting, the kind of corporate social that feels festive until someone gets fired. Marcus arrived at 7:22, Renee on his arm. She was wearing the black dress she'd bought for their 5th anniversary dinner. Daniel recognized it before he recognized anything else about the moment. Marcus worked the room, talking too much, too fast, establishing his credentials in every sentence. The performance of an insecure man at a party where he knows he might be evaluated. Renee smiled at the right moments, laughed at the right volume, positioned herself just slightly behind Marcus's shoulder. Not submissive, strategic. The body language of a woman who had decided that this time she'd made the smart choice. Her eyes moved across the room in a slow sweep. They landed on Daniel for half a second, moved on. Then, they came back. He was already walking toward the center of the room. Claudette tapped a glass. One clean sound. The conversation dropped to a murmur. "For those who don't know him personally," she said, "this is Daniel Cole. He owns Cornerstone, along with a few other things, including, for about half of you, the company you work for." Light laughter. The kind where people aren't sure yet how much to perform. Daniel smiled. Easy, unhurried.
The way a man smiles in a room he has been comfortable in for years. I'll keep this short. I don't love speeches. What I do love is showing up, personally, directly, for the things I care about. Some of you have heard I'm hands-on with the properties. A small pause. Keeps me sharp. He let that land. Across the room, Renee's glass stopped moving. Not dramatically. Not the movie version where something shatters. Just stillness. The specific stillness of a mind trying to run two images against each other and finding that they match. The Navy uniform, the work boots, the name patch. Dale. At 7:48, two members of the HR team moved toward Marcus. Daniel watched the color leave his face in a slow, southward migration. Watched 40 minutes of careful social performance collapse, like a set being struck after the show. Renee was 6 feet away when it happened. She watched with the expression of someone watching a car accident from a sidewalk. Horrified, frozen, already calculating the distance between herself and the impact. Marcus was walked to a side room, quiet, professional. The party continued around it, the way parties do, because most people prefer not to know what they don't have to know. Renee stood alone for the first time all evening. Daniel gave her 4 minutes. He'd learned, over the years, that 4 minutes is exactly how long it takes for shock to metabolize into something a person can be held accountable for. Less than that, and they're still processing. More than that, and they've started building a defense. 4 minutes. Then he walked over. She turned before he reached her. "You've been in my apartment." Low voice, not quite steady. "Several times," he said. "The faucet, the fan, the P-trap last Wednesday. You were..." She stopped. "You were disguised. I wore glasses and a different beard," he said. "That's not a disguise, Renee. That's a Tuesday. You knew I didn't recognize you." "Yes. And you didn't say anything." He looked at her. Really looked. The way he'd been doing from a careful distance for months. "You tipped me $5. You called me sweetie. You asked me to fix the smell before your boyfriend's party." He paused.
I wasn't hiding from you. You just stopped looking at me a long time before I ever put on that uniform. If Daniel deserved better, tap like. 1 second, that's all. And if you want to be in the room when the next one unfolds, subscribe. These stories don't announce themselves. They just show up.
She opened her mouth, closed it. Behind her, through the glass door of the side room, Marcus was signing something. "The lease is good," Daniel said. "Same terms as any tenant. Claudette handles it by the book. That won't change." He straightened his jacket. "I didn't come here to hurt you. I came here because it's my building and my company and my name on the mixer invitation. I was always going to be here." He picked up his drink from the table beside her, finished it. "Take care of yourself." And he left, not hurried, not triumphant, just a man who had gotten his answer, the same answer he'd been getting, incrementally, for years, and had nothing left to wait for. Outside, the Silverado sat in the lot. Dented panel, cracked mirror. He got in, started it, sat in the quiet for a moment. He thought about the first day he drove this truck. Back when the company was 2 employees, a rented server rack, and a question mark where the future was supposed to be. He thought about how the truck had outlasted the company, the marriage, and every version of himself in between. He reached into his shirt pocket. The $5 bill was still there. He left it there. Inside, the party continued. Renee sat back down at the table. Not because she wanted to, because leaving immediately felt worse than staying. Around her, people talked about things that had nothing to do with her. She held her drink with both hands and looked at the door Daniel had walked through. Everyone in that room now knew exactly who Dale was. The question that would stay with her, long after the lease ended, long after the BMW disappeared, Long after the night became a story she told carefully to certain people with certain details left out. Wasn't why he'd done it. It was simpler than that. When did I stop looking? If that last question hit you somewhere quiet, you already know what the like button is for. Subscribe.